I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to Science Matters. Tonight we're competing with other stars, namely the Phoenix Suns. But I want to thank you for being here. This is our final Science Matters program of the summer. My name is Ted Liebler. I'm an adult services librarian here at the Downtown Library. And like I said, this is the last of our Science Matters. We did this monthly. This is the fourth session. And Science Matters at General Public Library is a popular science talk series which explores the latest research or knowledge on various scientific topics. The talks, led by a scientist or a researcher, are open to everyone and feature an engaging conversation with the audience. The purpose of this series is to reveal the direct connections of science in current research or in current practice in our everyday lives, while inspiring wonder and a greater understanding of the world and space around us. It's a very appropriate subject right now. Right, last Sunday we had Branson go up in the Virgin Galactic flight, came back down in New Mexico, and then on the 20th is it Jeff Bezos will be going up in the Blue Origin spacecraft. So I think we're right in the middle here. So this is a very exciting time for space topics, space travel. It's on the forefront of the national news, and the global news. So. Just glad to be able to present this at this time. Let's see. Tonight, we're gonna join us as we discover how NASA missions allow us to explore our solar system, and especially Mars, and to understand how commercial companies like SpaceX have taken up the lead to a race to Mars. We have NASA Solar Sister Ambassador Alexandra Nachman will take us on a tour from how we first explored space to how we might finally put a human on another planet. So I'm going to turn over the program to Alexandra. She'll present her side or presentation, and then we'll have questions afterwards. Again, thank you for coming tonight, and we'll see you on the other side.
All right, there we go. All right, so let me pull up the presentation, and super excited to share with you guys here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and strap on your seatbelts and hold on to your seats because we are going to space. So why are we so eager to get back into space, and especially on Mars? So let's do a little bit of background dive into Mars, kind of learn all about this little red planet that we are trying to visit. So Mars's diameter is about 4,200 miles. So it's actually quite a tiny planet. It's actually a little bit about half of Earth's diameter, which is about 7,900 miles. And its distance from the sun is about 155.8 million miles away. So again, quite some distance, as Earth is only about 95 million miles away from the sun. So here's the comparison of Earth to Mars to kind of give you an idea of just how teeny tiny this planet is. So Earth is the big blue orb, Mars is the tiny red one. And if we are going to go visit Mars, you know, we might want to think about, you know, kind of how many people we can send there, because it is a much smaller planet. And not only do we have to think about the size of Mars, its geology, its atmosphere, food, water, and all of that, we kind of got to think about how to even get there, because its distance from Earth can vary. So you can have things that are, or the orbit can be anywhere from 40 million miles at its closest approach to 250 million miles at its farthest location in its orbit. And it all depends on where Earth and Mars are in their orbits compared to each other. So the average distance of Mars from Earth is about 145 million miles. So that is just quite a huge, huge distance that we are trying to travel. Now, the red planet is named that because of the iron oxide on its surface. So it's essentially a very rusty planet. And it is kind of similar to Earth. We do have similar structures. It has volcanoes, it has valleys and deserts. It even has polar ice caps. And these polar ice caps were once thought to contain nothing but frozen water. So there's a potential water source for Mars. Melt the water and we can drink it, right? But we actually know now that a lot of that polar ice cap comes from frozen carbon dioxide, which is essentially dry ice. And you definitely don't want to drink dry ice. So Mars does go through seasons just like Earth, and as the planet cools and heads towards its winter season, the polar ice caps also grow. They grow a lot larger from that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which turns into that dry ice. And then, of course, in the summer, those polar ice caps are going to kind of melt, and that carbon dioxide is going to be released back into the atmosphere. So Mars does have an atmosphere, which is a very good thing when you want to try and visit another planet, as opposed to Mercury, which has a very, very tenuous exosphere, so it's not even really considered an atmosphere, or Venus, which has a very, very thick and cloudy and toxic atmosphere. So the atmosphere on Mars is composed of 95% carbon dioxide, 3% nitrogen, and only about 2% argon. So Earth does have similar composition in the fact that its carbon dioxide is replaced by oxygen. So we have an oxygen, nitrogen, and an argon atmosphere. However, our atmosphere is mostly nitrogen, less oxygen, and then barely any argon and other gases in our atmosphere. And Mars does get those nice temperature variations with the seasons. So if you happen to be visiting in winter and you're trying to mine some of that frozen water in those poles, it can get as cold as negative 195 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is really, really, really cold. But then if we tend to stick towards that equator area where it's going to be warmer, especially in the summertime on Mars, it can get to a balmy 70 degrees Fahrenheit. But then at night, it's going to dip down into the negative 100s. So you might get a nice day, but at night, it's still going to be pretty cold on Mars. And that's during the summer. And not to mention the global dust storms or the, very dry desert planet. So this image shows Mars's atmosphere. You can see in the streak at the very top of the image, that is what its atmosphere looks like. And it's a lot thinner than Earth's own atmosphere. So if we're thinking about traveling to Mars, we kind of have to take into account all of these different things. How are we going to breathe? Where are we going to get our water from? What are the temperatures like? And how long is it going to even take to get to Mars? So depending on kind of when you launch and where the planets are, it can take anywhere from 150 to 300 days to get to Mars. So that doesn't sound too bad, considering, traveling through space takes a really, really, really long time. And we would use what is called the Hohmann transfer orbit. And essentially, we have to figure out how to build a spacecraft that can handle a long mission like this with enough supplies to keep the astronauts safe, sustain them, make it back. If something goes wrong, we can't help them. And then, of course, this beautiful image is actually from Mars. To me, it looks like something that you would find on Earth that you could, go hike around. So gorgeous, gorgeous terrain. So this is that Hohmann transfer orbit using the InSight probe as an animation. So that Hohmann transfer orbit that we would try to use to get to Mars is going to be that elliptical orbit. And you can see in the blue, it leaves Earth and hits Mars in the green. And even though it kind of looks like it goes pretty quickly, this probe actually took about I want to say 5 or 6 months to get to Mars. So it takes a decent chunk of time to get there, even when the planets are really close together. So these are things that we have to figure out as we're trying to get to this little red planet. And before we dive into humans in space, I kind of wanted to highlight some exciting missions that have happened in the past couple of years, including the very famous Perseverance rover. So this just landed, and it was such an exciting mission. I feel like I'm kind of old enough now and appreciate astronomy enough to really be amazed by these rovers. And not only did we land a rover on Mars, we also landed our first helicopter or drone, a flying object on another planet. And the reason that's really, really cool is because of that atmosphere that we were talking about. So because it's so much thinner than Earth's atmosphere, we have to figure out how to make it fly, you know, using different mathematical calculations and kind of figuring out how to make it work. And then on another planet where we can't easily, you know, touch it or fix it or help it. So Perseverance was launched last year, and it reached Mars this year, and it was part of the Mars 2020 mission. Such a cool mission. It was essentially an upgraded Curiosity rover. It looked very similar to the Curiosity rover, about the same size, you know, upgraded equipment, and so cool to see it land. And we sent Ingenuity, which was housed in the belly of Perseverance. So when it did land and eventually let go of Ingenuity, it was kind of underneath it, which I thought was kind of cool. And its goals are to kind of continue what we've been doing, looking for evidence of that past life on Mars, you know, studying the geology and the climate. And it was so cool to get to watch this launch and watch it land. And Ingenuity is just so amazing. You have this helicopter drone, and it must essentially be autonomous. It has to be able to take off, fly, and land without human intervention. Because of that distance between Earth and Mars, it's going to take some time for a human command to reach that spacecraft. So we essentially told it, hey, you got to fly and you got to do it on your own because we can't talk to you, at least not really, really fast. So it's had 9 successful flights, and its longest flight was about 2.7 minutes, so a little over 2.5 minutes. And if you guys are ever interested, I encourage you to Google Ingenuity flights because they have videos of it flying, and so cool. And I wanted to share some images of Perseverance on Mars before we kind of dive into, you know, not only having rovers on Mars, but having actual people on Mars. So this is one of the first images that was taken when Perseverance landed, and it kind of got everything ready. And this just, the images from Perseverance are beautiful and very detailed. It's like you're right there, and it looks really, really similar to Earth as well. And what was even cooler about Perseverance is that we could actually watch it land. So this is a view from the sky crane, which was above Perseverance as it dropped it down onto Mars. So we actually got to see the rover like dangling there and land. This is just so cool. So this is an artist concept of what that would look like. So that's kind of what the sky crane looks like. It's just this little spacecraft that drops off Perseverance onto Mars. And I have a really exciting video of that landing to show you guys. If it plays. All right. All right, so that was really, really cool. You got to actually see the rover landing. I'm just going to play it one more time really quick, and then we'll figure out how humans are going to get there next. All right, so that just blows my mind every time I see it. One of my favorite things to watch. And hopefully when they do eventually get to Mars, they will have videos just as cool of rockets landing. Oops. All right. So how are we going to get to Mars? Well, a lot of it for a long time was put on NASA because, you know, it was the prominent space center. It was kind of the main thing, even though it did work with private companies. But it wasn't until in the past decade or so that private companies have really taken a huge leap forward and contributed a lot to our current space program. So it's been 52 years since another human has set foot on another celestial body. So the anniversary is actually coming up very, very soon. And it is kind of mind-boggling how you'd think if we've done it once, we'd want to go back. I mean, 52 years is a very long time. So the first body that we ever set foot on was the closest one that we could reach our beloved moon. And even though we say it's close, it's about 240,000 miles away from us on average. So that's really, really, really far. Very long road trip. But in terms of traveling by rocket, it's only about 3 days away. So it's much easier to plan a mission for 3 days versus that 150 to 300 to Mars. And we technically first visited the moon in 1959 when the Soviets crashed a lunar module onto its surface. And then 10 years later, we were actually able to set foot on the moon, which is just so cool. The moon is just so beautiful. So that was on July 20th, 1969. So in 6 days, that anniversary is coming up again, which is really, really exciting. If you know of any Apollo events around, I encourage you guys to attend them. They're so cool, and learning the history of our visits to the moon is just amazing. So this occurred on the Apollo 11 mission. Neil Armstrong was the first one to step off the Eagle craft, followed by Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins was circling the moon in the command module while they got to explore. So those Apollo missions lasted a great chunk of time, even though we essentially haven't been back ever since. And they lasted from 1961 to 1972. There were about 6 missions that actually landed on the moon, and only 12 men have actually walked on the moon. And our main goal at the time, said by President Kennedy, was to land a man on the moon by the end of the decade and return him safely. So we barely beat it, just hit it in 1969. It took a long time to develop those rockets and get us safely into orbit and to the moon itself. So I wanted to share this really cool picture of the final moon landing mission. This is astronaut Harrison Schmitt. He's standing next to a giant boulder, and it's just so cool to see that, you know, it's just such a massive, massive boulder on the moon. And there's also, you know, massive rocks on Earth too, but it's just cool to see it on another celestial body and those huge gray mountains and ridges in the background. We're just so small compared to everything. But why haven't we gone back? Well, sadly, a lot of it has to do with politics, at least for the public sector, because NASA is federally funded. There's just, always that component of money. And when we went in the 60s, that space was strong. Like, we were coming out of World War II, we were developing rockets. We had the Soviets in the Cold War, and they were developing satellites, and suddenly it was just like we had this new technology, and we had to figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to beat them. We also had the atomic bomb, so it's kind of like just a bunch of this kind of dangerous atmosphere was around at that time. So, no cost barred. We went all out. We spent a lot of money on this program. It was about $264 billion in today's dollars. And while I'm sure there are departments of the government that do spend that much today, NASA does not get nearly that big of a budget. And I believe one of their most recent projects with the Mars mission is only allocated about $3 billion. I'm not sure how much SpaceX is putting into that either, but spending $264 billion to get to the moon versus $3 billion to try and get to Mars, like it's quite a lot of difference. It's also been due to that political motivation where, one presidential administration might say, yeah, let's go. Another might say, no, we're going to cut that. We're going to cut back. And then the next one comes and changes their mind. And it's like, go, no go, go, no go. So it's kind of frustrating in that aspect. But because of that huge private sector push, and I think a lot more public support and interest, we're going back, and it is so cool. So that private sector, that one that's kind of been really popular and really in everyone's mind, is SpaceX. And I think mostly because they do have that mission of like, we're going to Mars and this is going to happen. And so now suddenly we're also kind of seeing that feeling of like, hey, can I go to Mars in my lifetime? So it's really quite cool. So SpaceX is formally known as the Space Exploration Technologies Corps, or we just like to call it SpaceX, and it was founded by Elon Musk, which most of you probably know. And it was actually founded in 2002. And when I learned that, it kind of blew my mind because I feel like it's only been recently that it's been popular, or maybe it's just because I've been getting into astronomy myself. But it's really quite cool to see that, it was founded in 2002. It's almost 20 years later. Huge progress. And the reason he started this company was he essentially wanted to buy some rockets and probably go to space himself. And he found that it was really expensive to buy them. So he ended up creating a company to create them. And I'm not sure how much cheaper it's been to make our own rockets or not, but it's just been quite the journey to watch the evolution of these rockets. So the goals of SpaceX are to decrease the cost of space, to increase access to space, to create that sustainable, reusable launch system, and to go to Mars. So that's their main motivator and driver. And it's really cool if you've been following them for years and years to see that things that we've never been able to do before, like, landing a rocket back down on the ground, upright, is just amazing. It's just such a stunning thing to see, especially after we haven't gone back to space for so long. But we are going back, and not just to Mars. This one I think is also super cool. We're going back to the moon, and we are doing it with the Artemis program, and not in the next 10 or 20 years, but like hopefully mid-2020s. So Artemis began in 2017. It is still ongoing. So a lot of what you might hear about can easily change. And their goal is to not only get men back on the moon, but a woman as well. So we might get the first woman on the moon, which is really quite cool. And a little fun fact about Artemis is that it is Apollo's twin sister. So going back to that mythology of, you kind of had the first moon mission with Apollo and then the second one with Artemis, who is female. That's pretty cool. And we have hired the Artemis generation of astronauts. So they are starting their training. They are preparing to go to the moon. And it's just really an exciting time. And it would be so cool if, you know, in the future, a normal person, normal citizen could also go to the moon. So we do kind of hope to use the moon as potentially like a landing base for a hop to Mars. It would definitely make it kind of convenient and easier. And it also can help us test, you know, the things that can we do on Mars, what we do on the moon. I'm sure SpaceX might kind of try and cut out the moon completely and go to Mars, but we are definitely interested in going back to the moon and kind of establishing how to exist in space, because we were born on Earth, we are evolved for Earth, and it's just tricky to get all of those supplies and things that we need. So right now, NASA is working with SpaceX. They will also be working with Boeing, and this is the Starship HLS, which stands for Human Landing System. This is a concept drawn by an artist to kind of show what they are aiming for with these rockets. So if you'll notice at the bottom, they kind of have these tiny, teeny little humans, and it always just blows my mind how big rockets are. Like, every time I see a comparison of a rocket, whether it's a Saturn V or the Starship, compared to a human, we're just so small. And there's going to be 2 missions for the Starship. It is currently in development. They're kind of, you know, figuring out how to make this spacecraft. They're going to do an uncrewed test mission to kind of test everything out, see how it's going, see if it works. Can we do this? You know, hopefully not blow up any rockets. And then when that's successful, we will be sending a crewed lunar or crewed spaceship to the moon. How cool is that? So the moon might not be as exciting as Mars. I think they're both very exciting. And the fact that we are going to send people back to the moon in my lifetime is just so cool. Just so cool. So it's also going to be able to dock at this really cool thing called the Lunar Gateway. So the Lunar Gateway is also in development, and it's essentially going to be a space station that orbits the moon. So just like we have the International Space Station orbiting our own planet, this one is going to orbit the moon. It's going to have, you know, science labs. It's going to be solar powered. Astronauts can live there. It's going to get regular resupplies. It's only meant for short-term habitation, about 3 months at a time. And it might not even look like this when it is done and the final concept has been created and built. But the fact that we are making a space station to orbit the moon is just amazing, because now not only can we fly to the moon and land people on it, but we can also then put them in orbit around the moon, and it kind of gives us, you know, better points to hop off of, like whether we go to from the moon to Mars, or if we just go to the moon to study it. So, you know, it's kind of the next step, and it's a really huge thing when it comes to human space exploration. So I think with these private companies really kind of just working together and getting that success from companies like SpaceX, we are finally seeing that push for human space exploration again. The space shuttle program was discontinued in the early 2000s. I want to say around 2008 or 2011, somewhere around there. So it's kind of, it's kind of like, how do we get back to space? We don't have a space shuttle. What are we going to do? And why is no one interested in going back to space? But now that SpaceX has come out in a big way and kind of funded that further research to get into space, we're going back. And we are currently doing the commercial crew program where NASA works with Boeing and SpaceX, and it is super, super exciting. I hope you guys were able to catch this launch live when it happened. And you essentially are rotating the crews in and out of the International Space Station. So maybe you're sending people up or taking them down. And the flights that are doing this are operated by private companies. So before, we had the space shuttle or a NASA rocket, it was all NASA. And now we are allowing those private companies in, and we're able to get so much more done. So for Boeing, they're going to have their Starliner spacecraft. SpaceX uses their Crew Dragon, and so far it's only been SpaceX that has sent people up to the International Space Station. But this is kind of a huge, huge deal. So the first Crew Dragon mission that went up was the Endeavour, and this is owned and operated by SpaceX. But the significance of this is that it was sent from US soil. So it was launched last year, a little bit before Perseverance was launched. So we just had a bunch of really exciting things going on last year, despite having a very traumatic global event happen. It was launched on May 30th, and I did get to see this live, which was really, really cool. So this was the first crewed orbital spacecraft launched from US soil since 2011. So this is the first time that we have sent people from the US soil to the International Space Station. I believe we were launching from Russian soil before, using one of their launch pads. So it's quite cool to see that, only 9 years later, we're able to kind of get back into it and, start it going again. And the astronauts that we sent up were Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken, and we launched from the Kennedy Space Center. So this is what that Crew Dragon capsule looked like. And I wanted to show you guys the launch. If you did not get to see it live, it is such a beautiful thing. And I'll play that for you. This was also launched from a Falcon 9 rocket that is owned by SpaceX. That just was such a cool thing to see. I believe I watched it at like 5 in the morning when it was still dark, or maybe 4:30. It was just such an iconic thing to see live. I'll play that one more time for you guys. So cool. That is just so beautiful. All right, so I will wrap up this presentation with a quote from Elon Musk that if the future does not include being out there among the stars and being a multi-planet species, I find that incredibly depressing. And I'd have to agree, it's definitely something that I think humans should be striving for. Space is just amazing, and we do need to care about our own planet, but it'd be really, really cool just to go see another planet. So I hope you guys enjoyed learning about how we are going back to space, hopefully hitting that moon landing by mid-2020, absolute latest at 2030, hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, and then seeing how long it takes us to get to Mars from there, because it really doesn't sound like it's going to be that long with all of the progress they're making. So if you guys ever have any questions, you can either ask them now after this presentation or find me at Peculiar Galaxy Astro, and I will stop my screen share and say hello. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask.
On behalf of the Chandler Public Library, just want to thank you for your presentation, Alexandra. One question I have to start, I just recently heard about the Solar System Ambassadors. I think that's coming from Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, out of Pasadena. Could you tell us more about that organization and how you got involved with them?
Yeah, so I think I got involved purely by chance. It was something I had somehow come across and had talked to someone who was in the program, and I said, hey, what is this program and what does it do? And it is essentially, it's run by NASA JPL, so their Jet Propulsion Lab, and we are all volunteers, and we get to do essentially astronomy outreach programs. So we do presentations, we do star parties where we set up telescopes, we go to classrooms, we can kind of do anything and, talk about the missions that NASA does, talk about space, do activities, all ages from children to adults. We just get to volunteer, and they do provide us with really cool training videos that discuss these missions in depth, and they usually have their applications open like once a year, but it is quite a cool program to be a part of.
Any other questions out there?
I have a question.
Thanks, Kelsey. Yeah.
My question is, for SpaceX, how they were doing a lot of crew, like, supply missions and tests, for testing on their space rockets. Why do you think it's taken this long for them to, launch crew, astronauts into space? Why would you think it would take this long for them to launch, with Doug and Bob Behnken? How long do you think, in your opinion, why is it taking so long for astronauts to be returned back to space?
I think there's kind of two parts to that. So the number one is definitely money. And even though SpaceX is the one that is developing the rockets, it's kind of like, well, if they weren't, then NASA would have to. So who's going to foot the cost for that rocket? And on top of that, they're not only trying to build a rocket, but they're trying to build a reusable booster. So before, when we would launch, it would just fall off into the ocean and that was it. It was done. So now that they're trying to reuse it and get it to, land and not fall over and explode, I think it took them that long to develop it and really get it working properly. And then probably once NASA saw it was safe, they're like, okay, we'll use your rocket and we'll give it a chance and send people to the International Space Station and, you know, see if it all works out.
Yeah. Yeah, I was like, I've been watching, you know, before like the start of SpaceX, and I'm thinking, yeah, it's great and all, but it's like, you know, I know it takes long for them to develop it, but, you know, I think they should have probably sent people, you know, more into space, you know, before, you know, waiting so, you know, so long for it. So that's what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah. Definitely. Oh, man.
I just was very inspired to see all the space activity, especially here on Earth, where we have all this strife and turmoil and issues to resolve. That at the same time, you know, we're shooting for the stars, or not, you know, for, you know, the use of, you know, the expression, but just to go beyond ourselves. It's, you know, I grew up and it's like you always hear about the history, and but now we're living the history and we're going into the future. So it's just like I said, it's an exciting time to be in.
I agree to that. I definitely agree with that. I feel like now we could go, you know, now I feel like now is the time. You know, now is the time to go back to space. I feel like, you know, for a long time, I feel like now is the time. Definitely.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think having that private company of SpaceX really come out and say, we are going to Mars, no matter what. Like, it doesn't matter what you guys think, we are going to Mars. And then, you know, it kind of again took that money for him to fund it and do it. But it's like, I think now that people see that and they see us starting to have these accomplishments, it really feels like this can happen. And I think it's also nice seeing that private sector, because now we're no longer reliant on who's president or who wants to fund or defund NASA. And it's just such a cool time, especially since I'm kind of only now just getting into astronomy. But in the past 2 years that I've been involved, like kind of learning about everything and seeing things, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're launching a rover and we're launching a new telescope and we're going to the moon and to Mars. And it's like, what? This is like the perfect time to get into this hobby and really kind of like learn everything. And we're just doing so many cool things. So it's a really, really exciting time right now for NASA.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I want to say thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
You're welcome. Yes. With that, we'll wrap it up. And again, on behalf of Chandler Public Library, we want to thank Alexandra. This was a long time in the making. And we want to thank the Solar System Ambassadors programs for, you know, being a part of this and being a partner for Chandler Public Library and Science Matters. So thank you. Good night.
Bye.